Okay, so I've made a few gaming vids now and I'm starting to get asked, what are the best games? So I figured I'd just make a vid on that too. So, incoming are my top dozen picks of all time. Just quickly before I start though, having seen more than a few lists like this out there over the years, I feel I should say a couple of things up front. Firstly, there's no sponsorship or the like happening here. This is purely my personal picks of what the best games are and not what I'm being paid to say they are. Secondly, I've deliberately tried to take the best from a variety of different genres. I figure no one wants a list like this where the person just names a dozen slightly different first-person shooters or the like, just because that's the game style the person making the list happens to enjoy the most. Third, I've deliberately avoided games that have leagues or that patch themselves so much that they become unrecognizable. An example would be, say, Path of Exile, which at one point would certainly have made this list, but then they introduced the Arch Nemesis League, and whether you liked or disliked that content, afterwards the game was never the same again. Or maybe a better example might be World of Warcraft. Amazing game back in the day, but then they came out with Burning Crusade, and like or dislike that expansion, afterwards the game was always completely different. And lastly, as this is the best games of all time, there will be quite a few old ones in here, but hey, you can blame that on the software companies for going downhill in quality over the years, and not me. That being said though, there are at least a few relatively new titles that make the list, so if you're one of those to turn your nose up at a game due to dated graphics, there'll still be at least a few recommendations in here for you. Okay, so with that, let's jump straight in with the best of the 4X games. 4X, for those that don't know, is short for Explore, Expand, Exploit, and Exterminate. And the king of this one, in my opinion, hands down, is, and will likely forever remain, the 1996 classic Master of Orion 2, or Mu2 for short. As with most 4X games, it allows you to customize your race a little bit, but in this one, instead of just saying, like in Civ, hey, I want to be England, or I want to be France, or whatever, in this you actually get a base number of points to spend on your race, and you can choose vastly different things to anyone else's picks. They can be, you can eat rocks so you don't have to farm, you can go heavy industry, you can go heavy science, you can go good at ship combat, you might decide to focus on money, you can spend all your points on things like lucky and charismatic. The choices are really quite varied. But in order to appreciate why this game is so good, you have to look at the tech tree. And this tech tree, you can spend points in your race in order to get every tech. Otherwise, you'll be researching one out of a selection every time you do a research. But instead of just being techs which, now I've got factories and I just build them everywhere and what's my next tech, this one you actually get to use them all in the construction of your armies. So every ship you build will have hull, armor, weapons, engines, all this sort of stuff, and depending on what your design is and what you put on will depend on how long it takes to build and all these other details. But I'm just going to share a quick story with you just to highlight why I think this game is so amazing. So I was playing with some friends. I had one friend decide his ships were going to shoot beam weapons. A solid pick at close range. They do a lot of damage. They never ran out of ammunition. All ran good. Another friend came along and went, well, to counter this, I'm going to go with missile ships. And so he would load up with as many missiles as he could, fire them all at the start of the fight, turn and run, and the laser ships, they couldn't get close enough to get the missile ships before they exploded. So, missile ships were dominating. I step in with my race. I've gone very heavy ground combat. I put all my super soldiers on assault shuttles and I launch them at the start of the fight. So, up against the missile team, his missiles would hit my ships and I would explode. My assault shuttles would board his ships. I would capture his ships. I would end the fight with his fleet. So that team was dominating for a while. To counter this, a different friend came up with the rather still amazes me strategy. He just went a whole bunch of the smallest, cheapest, readiest ships he could build. So scouts, he took all the weapons off. They had no armor. He could pump out one a turn. They don't sound very useful, but that's just it. They're not very useful. When my assault shuttles board his ships, hey, I just spent an entire assault shuttle and I captured a piece of rubbish scout with no weaponry or anything like that. And he had so many hundreds of these in a fight compared to the time it took to build one of my ships that he would just fly them out and self-destruct in my face until I didn't have a fleet left. So this is just highlighting just how many ways combat can go just before you even get into, do you want black hole generators or stellar converters, or it's got all the futuristic tech in there. But the depth of this game is amazing, and no other 4X game in my mind that I've ever seen has ever come even remotely close. Hot tip, if you are going to play this game, I recommend version 1.50.9. There are a lot of fan patches. There are a lot of attempts to stabilize this game for multiplayer and for online. This is the version which I think they got everything right. It's balanced well, but not broken, and is stable enough for multiplayer play. Okay, moving on to the other space game on this list. This next game is the winner of the story genre. So a lot of games have story, and I feel I should probably mention a couple of contenders. So, for instance, Mass Effect had a very good story, but if you wanted to get really into the story, you pretty much had to read the codex, and reading a book, okay, might be a good story, but it's not really integrated into the game. Like, the story did have a game, obviously, but that's not quite the same thing. Mu 3, the sequel to the previously mentioned Master of Orion 2, had a great story if you wanted to read the manual, because half the manual was pretty much just a novel. Very good sci-fi, well written, history of the future of the universe, but again, not really integrated into the game. If you want a game where the story actually evolves and can be explored and is a part of the game, I recommend the 1992 classic Star Control 2. I don't want to give any spoilers for the plot lines that you're going to encounter in this game, but I will say, if you're going to play this game, try and figure out what happened to the androsynth race, which is no longer in the galaxy, though they have, you can have discussions with some of the NPCs about what happened to them, where have they gone, what was their fate, etc. Just investigate that. That plot line was so outstandingly good in my mind as a kid when I first encountered it, that years later I wrote a little sci-fi book for my parents as a Christmas present one year, and I basically just used the plot of the androsynth and expanded on it. It is really, really good, and it is just one of a myriad of plots which are happening in the game. The game itself is also good, I should say, otherwise it wouldn't be making this list. It also has, for those that likes the multiplayer, quite a well-balanced battle royale option where you spend points on your fleet and then just fight one-on-one. That's good, and I do recommend you try it. It is a lot of fun, but that's not the reason that you play the game. The single-player game is where it's at in Star Control 2, and yeah, you're in for a treat. Okay, moving on to a more recent game, not the newest on the list, but certainly a lot more recent than those last two, is the winner of the puzzle games. Puzzle games being a big thing in recent times. The best of these is Portal. Now, I should say that the puzzles in this are fun and they're extremely well thought out and you will enjoy it, but if that's your sort of thing. But the reason that this game is so good is because it is hilarious. Like, seriously, do not play with the sound off. Have the sound on all the way through the game and listen to what the computer is saying all the way through. It is a very quirky, dark sense of humor, which is just, they really got it spot on. They nailed it. There is a sequel to Portal. It was decent. It wasn't as amazing. Portal 1 was really a standout. So it's the winner of the puzzle games, but I would also say it is the funniest of the games. Okay, so next up, suspense. Now, this sort of game genre is not for everyone. These are the sort of games which attempt to make you jump. They make you sweat because your character's survival is not at all guaranteed. There are a lot of ones that attempt to do this with gore or with... Silent Hill was sort of a dream sequency, monsters coming at you. Anyway, the one that I recommend for suspense is Resident Evil 2. Now, there are other Resident Evils worth mentioning. 1, 2, 3, and the prequel that was made, 0, are all in the same vein. And these are also sort of puzzle games in a sense, in that they do have puzzles there, but the puzzles are completely secondary to the survival aspect of the game. But you might be asking, but what makes it so good? So let me just share a little story of Resident Evil 2. The first time I played it through, you get to the end, you go, oh, now I can play as another character on the other side of events. You get to play the same timeline from a different perspective and see what happens. So I went, great, I'll play through. I got to the end, I didn't have enough ammunition. So about halfway through, there was an ammunition store, which my first character through just took everything, because why wouldn't you pick up all the ammo in a game? So there was none left for my second character, and I was like, oh, right, okay, so anyway, I played through again. I played my first character through, and I left enough ammo for my second character, and my second character played through, and I got to the ending, and I killed the boss, and I went, great, and put down my controller. And no, that wasn't the end of the game. There was another boss at the end after everything else, and I had no ammo for this, so back I went again. So I played through as my first character, and I left enough ammo, and I was really conservative and didn't spend a single flame bullet, which is the last beastie was vulnerable to fire ammo. And then I went through as my second character, again conserving every single fire bullet that I could for the last fight and being quite frugal with my bullets. Got to the last fight, had just enough ammo to burn the boss down. The game zooms in on the big bad guy's eyeball just before the final explosion, and it loops around, and that was the intro that I'd been watching of this game for I don't know how many hours I'd put in at this point, and describing how satisfying this was to have gone full circle and actually come out on top. It felt like it was really earned and that I'd actually achieved something by reaching this. Not to mention it was a good story and a really enjoyable game, but the fact that it made you work for the victory and made it all the sweeter. As for, I did say this was the winner of the suspense category. The Resident Evil games, the early ones, don't play 4 onwards. I mean, they're fine. They have... They started to introduce quick time events and unlimited ammo, and the game genre changed. You want to play 1, 2, 3, 0, and I think there was one in the middle called Code Veronica, which I never got into, but I hear was very similar. But these games did something which no other game could do, because they built up expectations over the course of games, and then they played with those expectations as games went on. So a lot of games, when they try and make you jump, they'll just have something come off screen, and, well, that's not going to make you jump, is it? That's just, hey, something came off screen, time to shoot it too, or whatever the response is in the game. Now, I will guarantee you that if you play Resident Evil in the order that they're meant to be played, which is Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil 3, if you play them in that order, there is a point in number 3 which will make you jump. I'm not going to spoil it. If I spoil it, you'll get a chuckle out of it, but you'll feel annoyed that I ruined that moment. I don't know how many people out there are going to take me up on this, but I guarantee there is a point in 3. 3 is not as great a game as the previous ones, but it does have that moment which, after 3 games of build-up and setting the rules and setting your expectations, it has a moment which will have you jumping out of your chair, and that is extremely rare in a game. I'm not one to jump normally. I think the only movie that ever made me sit on the edge of my seat was watching Aliens as a kid, where the face huggers are loose in the med bay with Ripley. This is an equivalent to that. This will make your heart beat a lot faster. Anyway, enough of that. Time to move on. The next game is a very well-known classic. I doubt many people will disagree with me on this one or be surprised that it's included in the list. This is a turn-based strategy, is probably the best way to describe it. It is XCOM Enemy Unknown. Now, XCOM was a great series. The first one has dated poorly. The later ones were not made as well. XCOM Enemy Unknown is the one that you want to play. It is the sweet spot. It is another game which makes you earn your victory. So you can play it through on easy, normal, etc. and think, oh yeah, I played that game, bit of fun, but like I got the hang of it. Try playing on the hardest difficulty. No problem with that? Well, try playing on the hardest difficulty on Iron Man, where you can't load saves. If you've done that, then try playing with all the second wave options turned on. These are unlocked after you finish the game on various difficulties. Different ones will unlock. I've done Impossible Iron Man. I have yet to do that with all the second wave options. It is a struggle, but again, every time you finish this game on a harder difficulty, it really gives you that sense of satisfaction for having beaten the game. It really makes you feel like you've earned your victory. And not just that, but it is also an excellent game. It is well thought out. There is a good mix of base building versus team equipping versus research versus actually just jumping in the combat and trying to get the jump on aliens and trying to prevent them getting the jump on you. It is an extremely good game. I probably don't have to tell you a story about this one. The chances are, if you're watching this vid, you've probably already played XCOM Enemy Unknown before. And if you haven't, well, again, you're missing out. Go check it out. 2012, I think it came out, and it has dated very well. Okay, so time to move to a very different genre again. This is going to be RPGs, specifically open world RPGs to start, and the best of these is Morrowind. Now this one, the graphics really have dated poorly. It was released in 2002, I think. But just because the graphics are a bit out of date and it looks like everyone's a cardboard cutout, doesn't mean that the game is not amazing. The story is amazing. The character development is amazing. I'm just going to share a little story of one example to highlight this for you. So playing this game, and a friend of mine, he made, because you can customize almost everything in the game, items, you can decide, hey, I wanted to have this magical effect and be this powerful, and if you go get the ingredients, you can do that. So he made, we used to levitate around our characters from A to B because it was that way you don't have to deal with all the plebs on the ground. He occasionally, these birds, if you flew over the wrong area, would just swarm you, and they were really annoying. And how do you deal with them? So my friend made this ring, which he could activate it once per flight, and it would just blow up everything in a radius around him. It was just stupid damage. And so, being chased by birds, pop. What he didn't realize was that down below on the ground, sometimes it would also be in the radius of the explosion. And one time he popped and he took out someone that was relevant for the primary quest line. And so it came up with a little note saying, the thread of prophecy has been severed. Would you like to continue playing in this doomed world? It gives you the option to kill every character in the game if you want, and if that dooms the world, so be it. This is in stark contrast to later games of the Elden Ring series, which this was the third, or other RPG games that they make nowadays, where pretty much every character that they think is important, they just make indestructible. I think Fable started this off by making children indestructible, and then now it's just silly where if you're playing Starfield, anyone with a name can't be shot unless there's a quest for it. So anyway, Morrowind was back before that all got stupid, but it's also unique, or at least unique in my knowledge, in that every item is predetermined at the start of the game. So if you go into a dungeon at the back of the mage's land and you go search this cavern and you know where to look, there'll always be the same chalice that does the same effect. Every item is predetermined. There is no randomly generated loot. You are in a world, left to your own devices, make the most of it, and go. And that is what all RPG games should be, but this is the only one that does that. As a last thing, I should also say, it's also one of the only RPGs with no invisible walls. It's set on an island, you can go out to sea as far as you want, that's fine. Invisible walls really bug me in RPG games, or ones that advertise themselves as open world. This doesn't have them. Hey, if you like old games, give it a shot. Speaking of old games, this is probably the oldest game on the list now. We're still talking RPG, but we're going to go for roguelike games. It is a genre that is not for everyone, but if you're a fan of them, you know who you are. The best of these games is Ancient Domains of Mystery, ADOM for short. Now this, to my knowledge, is made, or was for a very long time, made and updated by just the one guy. It was sort of a labour of love, I guess you'd call it, and it shows. This game, it's hard to describe just how in-depth it is. So obviously with a game with essentially no graphics, you can fit a lot more detail into the game. And this game has really crammed it in, even with that vast amount of extra playroom. I could go into all sorts of stories for this one, but instead I'm just going to say pay attention to the deaths of every character. So yes, you can just step on a fireball trap and explode, or you can be squished by a falling block or something like that. But it will always give you a detailed explanation of your death at the end. And I've had ones like my character was sacrificed on an altar by a passing orc, or just because I happened to step on an altar and didn't see the orc around. I was planning on sacrificing stuff on the altar myself. There are deaths like I've died of old age in the game because I got aged by a ghost lord, managed to survive, but then of course my guy was well past his years, and it just gives you a dice roll essentially every movement step to see if you die of old age. It'll tell you where you died, it'll tell you how you died, it'll tell you who killed you, it gives you a lot of details. And this is just the tip of the iceberg in the depth of the game. Again, it's a roguelike game, but it is unique among roguelike games in that it is huge. There are the character and racial classes you can go from the start. You'll probably be blown away just by the choices of developing your character, let alone the actual size of the game and the number of dungeons you can explore. And look, if you like roguelike games, this is the one. I don't have a preferred version for this game. At one point, for reasons which remain a mystery to me, one of the versions changed the button layout, and after 10 years of playing the game or so, suddenly the buttons that were under my fingers were not the buttons of the game, and so I haven't actually played since. But I can recommend the game itself. It is still an excellent game. I do plan on going back to it someday once I can be bothered getting the new buttons under my fingertips. Yeah, give it a shot. Okay, so speaking of labours of love, another game where this shines through is Project Zomboid. Now this is the winner of the survival category of games. Yes, we had Resident Evil, but you can load and save in that, and that's not really the same thing. And yes, we had XCOM, but you don't have to choose to play on Iron Man in that. You can load and save in that. Project Zomboid is a game where, as the name implies, it is set in a post-apocalyptic zombie-infested world. You are one of the few survivors. You need to build your base, gather your supplies, fight off zombies, find a way to feed yourself, etc., etc. But if you ever get bitten by a zombie, that's it. Your character has been infected and he will die. There is nothing you can do about that. And this really adds pressure to the game. You play very differently to games like this where you get saves and you can do whatever you want. If you've been playing your character for a couple of months game time and suddenly there's a horde of zombies coming over the hill at you and all you've got is a nearly broken axe, you're going to think twice about taking them on compared to legging it and trying to find safety for the night and just hide away. It is a game where everything is hard earned. There is no set ending to this game, which I actually approve of, because as a zombie apocalypse, you shouldn't be able to win. It even starts off every game with the words, "This is how you died." Like, essentially, it is just the story of your character surviving as long as he could against the odds until eventually every character ends the same way. Every single character dies to, well, normally the zombie horde. Sometimes other players, if you're playing multiplayer, will find you and sniper you from a distance or something and steal your goods. Whatever the case, it is a game where they have gone to a lot of detail. It keeps track of things that you wouldn't even think of, like lipids in your food for when you work out how much you get out of it. And I don't know, just details that seem insane, but they've included, and they just keep on adding to it, not in a way that changes the game, just in a way where they open up new cities, or they decide to balance things to make it fairer. Or look, if you like harsh games where you're battling uphill the whole time, check it out. Just as a bit of an aside, my favourite mode in that game is CDDA. I forget what that stands for now, Cold Dark Days Ahead or some such. But you start off having slips getting out of the shower. So this is at the start of the zombie apocalypse. You are plastered, inebriated. You have cut yourself on the groin and are bleeding out. You are wet and cold. You're hypothermic. You have a cold, so you're sneezing. So you give your position away to the zombies. Your house is on fire. It throws all this stuff at you, and just living through the first 5 minutes can be so much fun. Like again, you can set the difficulty to whatever you want. Maybe you start off in a nice peaceful world where there's like one zombie on the block, and you build up your fortifications, whatever. But you can set it to whatever difficulty you want. Again, it's a lot of fun. It deserves its spot in the top dozen. As you may have noticed, I'm a fan of harder games, the ones that really challenge you. And this is, I guess, challenging games as a category. This is the king, is the Dark Souls series, and included in that is the more recent 2022 Elden Ring. So Dark Souls, you may have heard of it. They had a prequel game, Demon Souls. Personally, I never got into that one as much. It seems very good. I'll probably play it one day. But I can recommend Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, and Elden Ring. Elden Ring is the open world version of the Dark Souls games. If you're playing them, a couple of tips. Dark Souls 3, you really want the downloadable content, the DLC. The game itself, they'd started to sort of slide away from their core game ideas, but the DLC for number 3 brought it back on par and made it just as good as the previous games. And Elden Ring, there's a lot of different patches, but a lot of these patches are made for multiplayer, which is an option in the game, but I'm not recommending Dark Souls or Elden Ring for multiplayer. Some people get a great kick out of that. That's not for me. I recommend it for the PvE, the player versus environment aspect of the game. And for that, I would recommend about patch 1.02-ish. Somewhere around there. This is before they started nerfing the bosses and making them just stupidly easy. Which is a real shame that they did that. But I've got another video, I don't know if anyone's watched it yet, on one of the bosses, Melania, which made a bit of a name for herself as one of the toughest bosses in any computer game ever. And it was well earned. She is an exceptionally hard boss. But then nowadays in patch, I think as of making this, we're up to about 1.09, give or take, for a patch version. And now you just have to walk up and tank her damage and slash her with a sword a few times. It's not the same game. So if you're a fan of Dark Souls, 1 is probably the most hardcore. 2 was a little bit easier, but still very good. 3, again, the DLC is where it's at. If you're a fan of them, check out Elden Ring 1.02-ish again. And I recommend single player offline mode. If you play online and don't like it, don't blame me. That's not what I recommended. Okay, so next up we have a classic game. Now this is, I'm just making up categories for games at this point in case you hadn't noticed. This is a good drinking game. If you've got some friends over, you've got some beer, you just want, someone's just playing on the computer and people are just watching him do whatever, Grand Theft Auto 3. Now, there have been some other very good Grand Theft Autos. I personally really liked Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, but I'm choosing number 3 because this is the one that first got the formula right. There have been many games that refined it since, but it set the bar. So the game is just an open world. You're essentially a criminal doing whatever the hell he feels like. Carjacking is just the very base level. You get a car and you drive. But if you want to go on a rampage and just shoot down helicopters with rocket launchers, or you want to go steal a tank off the army, you can do that. It is surprisingly fun. If you just want to explore the city and run around and see what you can find, and see if you can find some unusual weapons or something, that's fine too. The fighting, honestly, is not amazing, and the graphics have dated, and the game itself doesn't have much to it, realistically. There's a quest that you can follow, and there are little submissions. But it is a surprising amount of fun, even if you're just a spectator, to just watch someone playing this game. It really set the bar, and a lot of games have tried to copy it since, and in my mind have failed. If you played Cyberpunk, maybe, or if you played... This is the one which other games like that wish they could be. Next up, for games setting the bar, so this is a distinct genre of games, combat games. This is where you have two characters on the screen battling each other, kicks, punches, whatever the game happens to involve. I've been playing these games for longer than I can remember, since way back in Battle Arena Toshinden and all those sort of games. But the game that wins this is Tekken, specifically Tekken 2, if you're interested. And there's a couple of reasons that this pulls ahead of the other categories, like your Street Fighters or your Mortal Kombat. So all those other games, they all have quite unrealistic moves, whether you're launching Hadouken fireballs or you're throwing out spears from the underworld and ripping off people's heads. Like, sure, that's fun, or it can be, but with Tekken, or at least Tekken 2, apart from the one character, Devil, who had laser beams and wings, and that was more sort of to try and give the game a sense of plot, but every other character, every move was a realistic one, to the point where actually one of the people that I follow on YouTube, a stuntman by the name of Eric Jacobus, made a series of videos where he did in real life all the moves of Tekken, like just one after another, essentially. It's impressive to watch, but it shows that the moves they're not stupid. It's a fighting game you can sink your teeth into. But more than that, every move can be countered. If you know what you're doing in Tekken 2, and the other person that you're fighting against also knows what they're doing, you can have matches where you're just facing off against each other and trying to bluff each other out by maybe ducking, and do they waste their counter, in which case you can sneak in a kick to the head and the fight goes on. Like, you're trying to out-anticipate the other person and out-bluff them, and that's something which a lot of fighting games don't have. Later Tekkens, the graphics have improved substantially. If you don't like Tekken 2, Tekken's 4 and 6 are the next best. Tekken 4, they started to play around with sort of more stupidity. They had, I think, Bosconovich as a character who you could do an entire complicated moveset on the controller in order to get him to stand up because he was a drunkard, like just silly stuff like that. And Tekken 6, they started to introduce downloadable characters like, I don't know, Yoda and stuff. But the actual core of the game, if you want a good fighting game, 4 and 6, still true to the old style of combat where pretty much every move has a counter. They're still mostly realistic move sets. They started to introduce more characters like the teleporting ninja and just stupid stuff like that. But the actual games itself are still decent. But if you can handle graphics which haven't aged as well, Tekken 2 is the one which set the bar. And in fact, come Tekken 8, which is just around the corner now, I'm tempted to make that as a video coming up for how to survive against someone that's better than you. But the real appeal of Tekken 2, what sets it apart from all the other fighting games, is if your skill level is above your opponent's, you will win. It is a game where if you just mash the buttons, you're going to lose. If your skills are equal, it's going to be an interesting fight. I thoroughly recommend learning, if you haven't played the Tekken series, choosing 1, 2 if you can handle the bad graphics, 6 if you want something recent, 4 if you want something in between just to see but learn it with a friend. Just only ever play when your friend is there. Learn together and you will have some of the most epic fights imaginable. And yeah, there really is no limit to how skilled you can get at Tekken. It is just an ongoing thing because, again, every move has a counter move, but you're never going to learn every counter move. So you have to learn ways to deal with things. It is just, it is a good time. And to end on, just because a lot of people watching this vid may be after a bit of multiplayer fun, Tekken, sure, that's multiplayer, but it's in-depth and takes quite a long time to master. And Zomboid, sure, you can play multiplayer, but it takes a big time investment. If you're just after a quick multiplayer game which will last maybe 5 minutes and you get some fun out of it, I recommend the 2013 game, which went a little bit under the radars, honestly, Speedrunners. I think this was first released on the Xbox, but you can certainly get it on PC nowadays. It is just a game where you're running across rooftops and you have to get further ahead than one screen from everyone else in the race. Sounds simple, and then on top of that gives you a couple of weapons. You can shoot the opponent and slow them down, trip them up, ninja rope to get some more speed, take a shortcut, see if you can cut them off at the pass, so to speak. It is extremely fast-paced action. It is another game where it is possible to get ridiculously good if you put the time in. But again, I would recommend learning with some friends and progressing at the same pace, and you will have some truly epic matches, and it is so much fun. This game, I can't believe it didn't do better. Like, it did okay, but this game deserves a spot in the top 12 alongside the others, just because, well, it just hits all the right notes. And that's about it. Obviously, in a list like this, there are going to be games which were close but didn't quite make it in compared to some of the others. So, for instance, Prince of Persia 2, very, very close to making it into the list. I'm not going to list them all here, actually, because, well, I said top dozen. I've given a top dozen. That's good enough. If you want another list, let me know. If you have ones that you think should have been on this list in place of another one, please feel free to start up a conversation. I don't bite, and I'd love to hear your feedback. This, again, is my personal choice, but yes, I can understand if some of these get knocked out in other people's minds by similar games which have been more refined over the years. GTA 3 being a classic example. I do think GTA San Andreas was the better game, but, well, GTA 3 set the bar. So there are some hard choices needed to be made. Whatever the case, I hope there was something in there for you that you're now going to go test out and play yourself. Really, each of these games deserves hundreds, if not thousands of hours of playtime each, like each and every one. Whether you're willing to put that sort of time in to fully appreciate them, that's up to you. Hopefully you got something out of it. And yeah, if you're a gamer, I'm sure I'll bump into you online at some point, somewhere. Till then, see ya.